Selene Vey didn't intend to call anyone. Blood trickled from her lips onto the cold tile floor. Her hands trembled too much to hold the phone. She just dialed the last number in her contacts like a drowning person, grasping at anything floating on the water's surface. The man on the other end didn't ask if she was okay, didn't ask what happened. Just one sentence, his voice as cold as steel. Who touched you? Then the door exploded. Then that night changed everything. Please comment the city you're viewing in so I know how far this story has come, and stay tuned because the next part is even more horrific. The rain came down hard enough to sound like static. It hammered the roof of the Mercer Street townhouse in long, violent sheets, drowning out the traffic 2 blocks over, drowning out the music bleeding through the walls of the apartment next door, drowning out almost everything except Nolan's voice. And Nolan's voice had a way of cutting through everything. It always did. Low and controlled at first, the way a man sounds when he's decided something and just hasn't told you yet. Then faster, then louder. Then the kind of sound that made the neighbors turn their televisions up. Selene had learned the early signs the way people learn weather patterns. The particular stillness before a storm. The way he'd stop looking at her and start looking past her. The way his jaw moved like he was chewing something he couldn't swallow. Tonight she'd missed every sign. She was already in the bathroom before she understood what was happening. Her back hit the wall beside the sink and she heard the crack of her shoulder blade against the tile, and it was that sound, dull and flat and wrong, that finally broke through whatever part of her brain had still been trying to make sense of his words. She stopped trying to make sense of them after that. She just moved, locked the door, pressed herself into the corner between the toilet and the wall like a woman trying to disappear into the grout. Her lip was bleeding. She could feel it, the thick heat of it running down her chin, and she pressed the back of her hand against her mouth and stared at the locked door, and listened to Nolan Pike scream through the wood like something had gotten inside him that didn't belong to him anymore. She didn't know how long she sat there, long enough for her legs to go numb on the cold floor, long enough for the screaming to change shape, from rage to something uglier, more patient, more deliberate. He was talking to her now, explaining things, the way he explained things when he needed her to understand that this was her fault, that she had constructed this situation herself, that the logical conclusion of her decisions was exactly this, and he was simply the mechanism through which the universe was correcting her. She had heard this speech in different forms for 2 years. She knew every variation. She stopped listening to the words. Her phone was in her hand. She wasn't sure how it had gotten there. Her hands were shaking so badly the screen kept unlocking and relocking on its own, her thumbprint reading wrong, her grip too loose and too tight at once. She didn't have a plan. She didn't have anyone to call. Not really. Her mother was 3 states away and hadn't picked up in 4 months. Her friend Daria had drifted off the map after Nolan made it quietly clear that Daria wasn't welcome. She had a coworker, maybe. She had the number of a women's shelter she'd saved 8 months ago and then never used because she'd told herself it wasn't that bad yet. She scrolled without seeing. Her thumb hit a name she didn't recognize. She didn't remember saving it. The contact read only a string of digits with no label. No name, no note, nothing. She must have entered it wrong, must have hit the wrong number at some point and saved the mistake without noticing. She called it anyway. 2 rings. A silence that had weight to it, the kind of silence that comes from a room with no echo. Then a man's voice, not rushed, not startled, completely, unnervingly calm. Yes. Selene opened her mouth, and what came out was not the sentence she'd planned. There had been no planned sentence. What came out was barely language at all, a fractured, wet sound that she would have been ashamed of if she'd had any room left for shame. "Can you come get me?" she said. "Please." A beat of silence. "Who touched you?" She didn't answer. She didn't get the chance. The door came off the hinges. Not the lock giving, the actual hinges tearing free from the frame, wood splitting inward in a sound like a gunshot. And then Nolan was in the doorway with his shoulders still lowered and his face the color of something boiled. He looked at her on the floor. He looked at the phone in her hand. His expression shifted into something that wasn't quite anger anymore. Something that looked almost like relief, like he'd been looking for permission. The phone hit the tile when he grabbed her wrist. The screen cracked. The call should have dropped. It didn't. Selene did not remember the next 10 minutes clearly afterward. She never would. What she retained were fragments with no connective tissue between them. The sensation of the floor under her knees. The specific pattern of water damage on the ceiling above her, which she stared at for reasons she could not explain. Nolan's voice cycling through registers she had not heard from him before. Something frantic underneath the control now. A sound from outside. Engines. More than one. Then Nolan heard it too. He stopped. He went to the window. His body language changed so completely and so suddenly that it was almost like watching a different man step into his skin. He moved away from her, put distance between himself and the evidence of what he'd done. That was the word she thought of, evidence. And it told her something ugly about what she'd been reduced to inside her own life. The front door didn't open. It ceased to exist. One moment there was a door at the end of the hallway. The next moment there was an opening, and through it came men in dark clothing who moved the way trained animals move, efficiently and without wasted motion, and they spread through the townhouse's lower floor with the calm of people who had done this exact thing many times before. Selene heard Nolan say something. She heard one of the men respond in a voice so quiet she couldn't parse the words. She heard Nolan laugh. The particular laugh men produce when they are terrified and trying to perform the opposite. Then silence from below. Then footsteps on the stairs. Then Cassian Vale walked through the broken bathroom doorway. She had never seen him before. She would not have known his name if someone had said it to her in that moment. She only knew what he looked like standing in the frame of what had been a door. Tall, dark coat that fit him like it had been cut specifically for this evening, leather gloves on both hands, hair pushed back from a face that showed nothing at all. He looked at the bathroom. He looked at the cracked phone on the tile floor. He looked at the blood on Selene's chin. He looked at her for a long time without speaking. She should have been afraid. Later, she would try to reconstruct why she wasn't, and she couldn't do it. Something in his stillness read differently than Nolan's stillness. Nolan went quiet before he exploded. This man looked like the explosion had already happened inside him a long time ago, and what was left was just aftermath, controlled and purposeful. He crouched down. Eye level. Not close. There was several feet of floor between them, enough that she could breathe. But low, unhurried, like a man who had nowhere else to be. "Can you stand?" he said. His voice was the same as on the phone, quiet and without performance. "Yes," she said. She wasn't sure if it was true. "Are you sure?" She put her hand on the wall and stood up. Her knee buckled slightly. He didn't move to catch her or offer a hand. He just waited, watching, the way you watch a thing that needs to accomplish the task itself to know it can. She straightened. She was standing. "There's a vehicle outside," he said. He straightened as well, and she noticed his gloves were off now. She didn't remember seeing him remove them. They were in his left hand, folded together. "We can discuss everything later. Right now you should be somewhere warm." From below the stairs, Nolan's voice rose again. The frantic edge fully audible now, stripped of the controlled register. "I need you to understand the context. She called your number. I don't know how she even has that number. This is a misunderstanding." Cassian's gaze shifted from Selene's face toward the stairwell. A small shift. Almost nothing. But one of the dark-clothed men materialized in the hallway at the bottom of the stairs without any visible signal having been given, and Nolan stopped talking. Cassian looked back at Selene. "After you," he said. "So, the vehicle was an SUV with interior lighting set low, leather seats, no readable plates. A woman in a dark blazer handed Selene a cloth and said nothing when Selene pressed it to her lip. There were two of the black vehicles, so she counted a second one in the mirror as they pulled away from Mercer Street. And she didn't ask where they were going because she had already accepted, on some level she couldn't fully examine yet, that wherever it was would be better than the place she had just left. Cassian sat across from her, not beside her. His eyes tracked the street outside through the tinted window, and he said nothing for several minutes. When he spoke, it was still in the same register, unhurried. "The number you called," he said. "Where did you get it?" Selene looked at her hands. The cloth had come away pink. "I don't know. I didn't recognize it. I scrolled, and I hit it." That number doesn't appear in public records. It isn't attached to any name. The people who have it were given it personally by me. She met his eyes for the first time. Dark eyes, not warm, but not the eyes of someone who was lying to her. I don't know how I have it, she said. I'm sorry. Something moved through his expression, very briefly. Don't apologize to me. She looked back at her hands. The man in that house, Cassian said. Nolan Pike. You were with him how long? 2 years. A pause. Not uncomfortable. Processing. Anyone else know where you lived? My mother, a friend who I haven't talked to in a while. Celine's voice was steadier than she expected it to be. The adrenaline was settling into something flat and tired. I kind of stopped being close to people. He nodded once, like this confirmed something rather than being new information. He didn't ask her to elaborate. The place they brought her to was underground and had no right to look the way it did. She had expected a back room somewhere, a bolted door and industrial lighting and men playing cards. What she got was a corridor of polished stone that opened into a suite with walls that looked like they'd been imported from another country. Pale marble veined with gray, soft lighting built into the ceiling rather than hanging from it. Furniture that managed to be both sparse and deliberate. A window. Actual floor-to-ceiling glass, though she couldn't see a street on the other side. Only a cityscape spread out in the middle distance, with an amber glow that told her they were somewhere high up, or somewhere that piped an artificial sky. A woman in scrubs examined her. Efficient and impersonal, the way medical attention feels when it's administered by someone whose job is to not react to what they're seeing. Selene had a split lip, a bruised shoulder, the beginning of a deeper bruise along her left ribs where she'd hit the wall. Nothing broken. She already knew nothing was broken. She had learned to assess that on her own. When the woman left, Selene sat on the edge of the bed and looked at the window. Cassian appeared in the doorway 20 minutes later. He had removed the coat. Black shirt, sleeves rolled to the forearm. He looked like a different version of the same man. Less formal, not less controlled. You need to eat something, he said. I'm fine. You've been in shock for the last hour. Eat something. She looked at him. He looked back. She recognized the particular quality of his stubbornness. Not combative, just already decided, and she thought about fighting it and then decided she didn't have the energy. Okay, she said. He came back with a plate himself, which surprised her. She had assumed someone else would materialize with food the way the other people in this place seemed to materialize whenever they were needed. Instead, he set the plate down on the small table beside the window. Something simple, bread and sliced meat, and a bowl of what turned out to be a good broth. And he sat in the chair across from her and watched the city while she ate. She ate more than she thought she would. You should sleep, he said when she set the bowl down. I won't. You might. Tell me what's going to happen, she said. To Nolan. Cassian's eyes moved from the window to her face. He's being held. Held where? Somewhere he can't leave. And then? That depends on some things I don't have answers to yet. He leaned forward slightly, elbows on his knees, and for the first time his posture had something human in it. The weight of a man who was tired, maybe, or thinking harder than he wanted to. There's something you should know about Nolan Pike. Something I learned in the last hour. Selene set down the cup she'd been holding. Tell me. He owes a significant amount of money to a network that isn't mine. He paused. Chose the next words with something that looked like care. They deal in people, movement of people. Specifically people who are available, who won't be reported missing or not quickly. She heard the words. She processed them in order. She felt the cold working its way up from her feet. He was going to... Your name appeared on a transfer document, Cassian said. That's what I found. Your name, a date 2 weeks from now, and a destination. The room was very quiet. Selene's hands were on the table. She looked at them. They were completely still, which surprised her. Some distant part of her mind cataloged the fact that she had run out of the capacity for immediate physical fear, and what was underneath it was something colder and more durable. Not shock, something that would stay. The network, she said. Who runs it? A man named Victor Sarzen. Cassian's voice had changed. Not louder, not harder, just stripped of the last trace of warmth it had been managing. He operates under a legitimate front, high-end logistics, shipping, private transport. He has layers between himself and the actual operations. He's been running this for nearly a decade and has protection from several official sources. But now you know about it. I've known about Sarzen, Cassian said. I didn't know the scope. Finding your name on that list showed me the scope. She looked at him. Why does that matter? To you. Specifically. He held her gaze for a moment longer than she expected. Then he stood. Sleep, he said. We'll talk more in the morning. He was at the door. Cassian? He stopped. He didn't turn around. Thank you, she said. A pause, then, don't thank me yet. He was gone before she could ask what he meant. She slept. She dreamed of nothing, which was the best thing that had happened to her in months. In the morning, a woman brought clothes. Not what Selene would have chosen, but clean and well made, and the shoes were her size, which meant someone had looked at her feet while she was sleeping, which she decided not to think about. She found a bathroom with hot water and actual pressure, and she stood under it for a long time with her hand against the tile wall while the bruise on her ribs announced itself fully for the first time. She had 2 years of these conversations with herself in shower stalls and locked bathrooms. The part of herself that cataloged damage. The part that ran the math. How bad is this? Is this the one that ends it? What's the threshold? Where's the line? She had always found a reason to move the line. The line was gone now. She turned the water off and dressed and sat on the edge of the bed and thought about her life from the beginning with the specific detached clarity that arrives after a crisis, when the body has used up all its emergency chemicals and what's left is just processing. She was 27 years old. She had a degree in environmental science she hadn't used in 2 years. She had been erasing herself, slowly and then all at once, into the shape of something that fit inside Nolan Pike's idea of who she was allowed to be. She was in a fortified suite beneath a casino run by a Mafia boss who had saved her life because she accidentally dialed his private number. Her life was surreal, but she was alive in it. She stood up when she heard the knock. It wasn't Cassian. It was a different man. Younger, with the flat, watchful eyes of someone whose job was to observe and report rather than react. He told her, without preamble, that Cassian would see her in 1 hour and that breakfast was in the next room. She said, okay. She looked at the window. The amber sky from the night before had resolved into daylight, genuine this time, the kind that came from an actual sun and not artificial sourcing. She could see the edge of the river from here. She could see the industrial silhouette of what she'd later learn was Black Hollow Harbor. She had no idea that somewhere in that harbor, Victor Sarzen had already been informed that his transfer document had been compromised. She had no idea that Victor Sarzen now knew her name. She had no idea that the man who had saved her last night had just put the target on her back himself, not through malice, but through the simple act of looking into her situation too deeply, of pulling a thread that should have stayed unexamined. She was drinking coffee and watching the river. And somewhere across the city, in a building she would never be shown on a map, Victor Sarzen was reading her name for the second time. This time he was not simply moving her to another column on a spreadsheet. This time he was reaching for a phone. The hour passed. She went to see Cassian. He was in a room she hadn't been shown before. Larger, with a desk that faced away from the door, so that whoever entered the room saw only his back first, which she suspected was a choice rather than an accident. Bookshelves that held actual books, red ones, the kind with broken spines. A map on one wall that had things marked on it she couldn't read from the door. He turned when she came in and gestured to the chair across from the desk without standing. She sat. He looked at her for a moment, specifically at the bruise that had bloomed below her left eye, which she had caught in the mirror this morning and decided not to think about. "How are you sleeping?" he said. "You already asked me to sleep." "I did. Don't push it." Something crossed his face. Very briefly. She couldn't name it. "We need to talk about what happens next," he said. "I know. You can't go back to Mercer Street." I know. You can't go to anyone Nolan knew. He'll have given Victor names as collateral. People around you become liabilities. She absorbed this. So I'm stuck here. For now. He laced his hands on the desk. That isn't necessarily permanent, but Victor Sarzen now knows his document was accessed. He doesn't know by whom yet, but he will work backward. When he does, he'll understand that you're connected to my organization. That makes you a target, she said. Yes. So you saved me from one situation and put me in another one. He held her gaze. Yes. She appreciated that he didn't dress it up. What do you want from me? She said. Nothing. That's not how this works. I've seen enough of the world to know nothing comes from nothing. Cassian was quiet for a moment, not evasive, thinking. When I was 9 years old, he said, a man put my mother in the hospital. She stayed for 3 weeks. Nobody came to help. He picked up a pen from the desk and set it back down. That has nothing to do with you, and everything to do with why you're sitting in this room instead of somewhere else. Selene was quiet. I don't want anything from you, he said. I want Victor Sarzen's network burned to the foundation. That's mine to deal with. You are a complication I intend to address. I'm a complication. You are a person in a dangerous situation because of choices other people made. I'm trying to be accurate. She looked at him for a long time. He looked back without flinching, without performing, without the elaborate construction of expression that men usually deployed when they were managing her. All right, she said. All right, he said. She stood to leave. Selene. She stopped. There's something else, Cassian said. His voice had shifted, careful now, in a way that made her stomach tighten. About Nolan. About why he had that contact. She turned around. The way he was looking at her now was different from any way he'd looked at her before. Not cold, not warm. Something reluctant. Nolan Pike didn't come to Victor Sarzen by accident, he said. He was introduced by someone with access to both networks. Selene's hand found the back of the chair. What are you saying? I'm saying there's someone in the connection between Nolan's debt and Victor's organization who knew enough to make that introduction. Someone who knew the private emergency line exists. Someone who might have... He stopped. He was looking at something in his own thinking, and she could see the moment he decided how much to say. I'm still working out the edges of it, he said, but I needed you to know that this isn't a simple situation. Selene held the back of the chair. 2 years. She had spent 2 years believing the worst thing in her life was the man who had her name in his mouth like something he owned. And now she was standing in a room below a casino she couldn't find on a map, looking at a man who had pulled her out of one burning building and was beginning to look like he might be standing in front of another. Tell me when you've worked out the edges, she said. I will, he said. She left the room. She went back to the window with the river view, and she stood there for a long time. And she thought about the way he'd stopped himself mid-sentence. And she thought about the specific angle of what he hadn't said. And she thought, someone close to him knew that number. Someone close to him. And somewhere in the organization that had built this marble room and those bookshelves and that desk facing away from the door, somewhere inside the careful architecture of Cassian Vale's world, someone had already known she would call. 3 days passed inside the marble suite before Selene stopped counting them. It wasn't that time became meaningless, it was that the counting felt like something she'd borrowed from a version of herself that still believed in schedules and appointments and the basic reliability of what came next. That version of herself had died on the bathroom floor on Mercer Street. What replaced her was harder to name. Someone who ate when food appeared, someone who slept in short intervals and woke with her hand already pressed flat against the wall, orienting. Someone who watched the door. On the 4th morning, Cassian sent a woman named Petra to bring her into the main corridor. Petra was somewhere in her 40s, with the kind of face that had been pretty once and had traded the prettiness for something more durable. She moved quietly and didn't attempt small talk, which Selene appreciated more than she could have expressed. She walked Selene down a hallway she hadn't seen before, gray stone, recessed lighting, no windows, and through a door that opened into a room that smelled like coffee and paper and something mechanical underneath both. This was, she understood immediately, the room where actual work happened. 3 men sat around a table with laptops and printed documents spread between them. A fourth man stood at the far wall, studying a board covered in photographs and handwritten annotations connected by red thread. Cassian sat at the head of the table in the same black shirt from before, or one exactly like it, sleeves pushed up, reading something with his full attention the way men read things when they're not performing the act of reading. He looked up when she walked in. "Sit down," he said. Not unkind, just factual. She sat. He slid a single printed sheet across the table toward her. She looked at it without touching it first. Old habit, new context. And then picked it up. It was a document. A list. 12 names arranged in 2 columns with dates beside each one. Her own name was 7th on the left column, with a date from 2 weeks prior, and a destination code she didn't recognize. "Victor's transfer log," Cassian said. "Partial. We pulled it from Nolan's laptop before he could wipe it." He had this on his laptop. He had a portion of it. He was being used as a middleman for the documentation phase. He'd receive the log, verify certain entries, forward confirmation. Cassian paused. He wasn't just a debtor who made a desperate arrangement. He was operational. Selene set the paper down. She thought about 2 years. 2 years of believing she understood the shape of the problem. The drinking, the rages, the money that never quite added up. The phone calls he'd take outside in the cold at 11 at night. She had built an entire architecture of explanation around those things, and none of it had touched the actual structure underneath. "How long?" she said. "Our best estimate is 14 months. He was doing this for 14 months. Possibly longer. 14 months is what the documentation shows. She sat with that for a moment. The men around the table had stopped pretending to work on other things. They were watching her with the careful attention of people who had seen reactions to bad news before and were calibrating what this one would produce. She gave them nothing to calibrate. "The other 11 names on this list," she said. "Where are they?" Cassian's expression shifted, not away from her, toward something. "Some of them have already been moved," he said. "We're working on locations." "Working on it." "Yes." "What does that mean?" "It means 3 of them we've been able to identify, and we're in the process of establishing contact through channels that won't alert Victor's network that we know. The others—" He stopped. "The others are harder." Selene looked at the list again. 11 names. 11 people who had been on the same column she'd been on, who had not accidentally called a private emergency line, who had not had the specific implausible luck of landing in a marble room with a man who had a reason to care. "I want to help," she said. "No. I'm not asking for permission. You're in a room with 6 people who work for me," Cassian said. "You don't have the context for what helping would mean in this situation." "Then give me the context." The man standing at the board, dark skin, close-cropped hair, the permanent watchful squint of someone who'd spent years looking at things from distances, turned from the wall and said, without particular inflection, "She's right, Cassian." Cassian looked at him. "Dorian." "She's on the list. She has standing." Dorian crossed his arms. "And she's clearly not going to sit in the suite and do embroidery." A pause that had several conversations inside it. "Fine," Cassian said. He looked back at Selene. "But you listen first. You don't move without telling me. And the moment you become a liability instead of an asset, that changes." "Agreed," she said. "That was easy. I'm not here to negotiate. I'm here to help get those people back." She looked at the list one more time. "And to make sure Nolan Pike never does this to anyone else." Tut. Dorian Ruse was the person she spent the most time with over the next week, and she understood why quickly. He was precise in a way that wasn't cold. He explained things without condescension, without the performance of patience that men sometimes put on when they were teaching women things. He simply laid information out in order and waited for questions and answered them directly. He had been with Cassian for 11 years. He knew the networks, the geography, the internal logic of how Black Hollow City's criminal architecture fit together. He showed her Victor Sarzen's operation in pieces. The legitimate front was a logistics company called Meridian Freight, headquartered in a glass building near the harbor. On paper, it moved industrial equipment between port cities up and down the eastern seaboard. In practice, it had a secondary infrastructure, a shadow manifest system that ran parallel to the legitimate one, using the same vehicles, the same port contacts, The same paperwork language, but with human cargo instead of industrial. The genius of it, if genius was the word, was how completely the one structure legitimized the other. You couldn't dismantle the shadow without touching the legitimate, and the legitimate had lawyers and political contacts and a board of directors who either didn't know or had learned to stop asking. Victor bought protection 14 years ago, Dorian said. He was standing at the board with a red marker, adding a new thread. 2 city council members, 1 federal trade liaison, and a man in the Port Authority who handles manifest verification. Every time someone gets close, the verification logs are clean and the investigation dies. So he's untouchable, Selene said. Nobody's untouchable. They're just expensive to touch. What changes that? Dorian capped the marker. He looked at the board. The list we pulled from Nolan's laptop is the first piece of internal documentation we've had that isn't filtered through Victor's own record keeping. If we can get more, if we can find the parallel manifest system itself, we can take it to federal investigators who aren't on Victor's payroll. And you think there are investigators who aren't on his payroll? A few. He turned. Cassian has a contact, someone clean who's been building a case on Victor for years without the access to close it. Selene absorbed this. Why hasn't Cassian shared the list already? Dorian looked at her with the flat, steady eyes of someone who was choosing how much to say. Because sharing that list implicates several people inside Cassian's own operation as secondary contacts. And Cassian needs to know how far the contamination goes before he opens a door that can't be closed again. She heard the words. She let them settle. He thinks someone inside his organization is connected to Victor, she said. He knows it. He doesn't know who. Do you know who? No, Dorian said. He said it without hesitation, without the micropause that people produce when they're managing a truth. I have suspicions. So does Cassian. That's different from knowing. What are your suspicions? He looked at her for a long moment. Not yet, he said. You've been here a week. That's fair, she said. He went back to the board. She watched the threads connecting names to locations to dates, and she thought about the word contamination, the way it implied something that spread without the host knowing it was spreading, the way it made everyone in proximity suspect. She had lived inside contamination for 2 years. She knew exactly how it moved. Cassian found her in the corridor outside the operations room at 11 that night. She had been unable to sleep again. Not the crash and recover sleep of the first days, but something more awake, more deliberate. Her mind running through the board in the operations room and reaching for connections she didn't have enough information to make. She'd been sitting on the floor with her back against the wall and her knees pulled up, which was not a dignified position, but was the one her body wanted. He stopped when he saw her, looked down. Floor, he said. It's a good floor. He leaned against the opposite wall and put his hands in his pockets and said nothing, which she was learning was a characteristic mode of his. He didn't fill silence with talk. He waited in it. Tell me about your mother, she said. A pause. No. You brought it up. I gave you context. That's different from an invitation. Fair enough. She looked at the far end of the corridor. Tell me about Dorian, then. What about him? How long has he actually been with you? 11 years. No hesitation. And you trust him. Now a pause. Smaller than she might have expected, but present. Yes. Why does that sound like a question when you say it? Cassian looked at the ceiling. He exhaled through his nose. I trust him because I've watched him make decisions under pressure for over a decade, and the decisions were always consistent. There's a logic to what he does. He brought his eyes back down. Trust, in my world, is a pattern analysis, not a feeling. That's a very sad definition, she said. It's kept me alive. It's kept you isolated. He looked at her. Is there a difference? She thought about that. Yes, she said. Alive is biological. Isolated is a choice you keep making. He was quiet. The person inside your organization, she said. You're not telling me who you think it is. No. Because you don't trust me yet. Because I don't want to poison your perception of someone you're working with based on a suspicion I can't prove. If I'm wrong, I've made your situation inside this operation harder for no reason. He paused. And if I'm right, I need you to be able to work with them without showing it." She considered this. It was a more careful answer than she'd expected. "Victor knows I'm here," she said. "You said he'd work backward." "He's working backward. Yes." "How long do we have before he confirms it?" "Days? Possibly less." He pushed off the wall. "Which is why I need you to stop sitting on the floor and sleep so you're functional tomorrow." "You're bossy for someone who said he didn't want anything from me." "I said I didn't want anything from you. I didn't say I wouldn't tell you when you're making bad decisions." She looked up at him. He was looking down at her with an expression that was impossible to fully decode. Not soft, not hard, something in the register between them that she had no vocabulary for yet. "Fine," she said. She stood. Her shoulder protested. He watched her register the pain without commenting on it. "Good night," she said. "Good night." She went to the suite. She lay down. She stared at the ceiling and thought about pattern analysis and whether trust was really something that could be reduced to it, and whether the reason his definition sounded sad to her was because she recognized it, because she had spent 2 years performing exactly that math on Nolan and getting every answer wrong. The ceiling gave her nothing. She slept anyway. The meeting with the federal contact happened on the 8th day. He came to them, which told her something about the power geometry involved, and his name was Agent Terrence Holt, a man in his mid-50s with the exhausted eyes of someone who had been running a case too long on too little. He came alone, which either meant he was very good at his job or very desperate, and she suspected both. Cassian laid out the list in the conference room with Selene and Dorian present. Holt looked at it for a long time without speaking. When he finally looked up, it was at Selene. "You were on this list," he said. "Yes." "And you're currently—" He looked at Cassian. "She's under my protection," Cassian said. Holt rubbed his jaw. "You understand the position this puts me in." "I understand it completely," Cassian said, "which is why I'm not asking you to endorse my operation. I'm asking you to use the documentation." "The documentation came from your people pulling it off a private laptop. Chain of custody is—" "The documentation led to the laptop," Dorian said from the corner. His voice was flat and precise. "The laptop was found during a welfare check on a civilian who had called a number seeking assistance. The laptop was in plain sight. Your people can build the chain from there." Holt looked at him, then back at Cassian. "You've done this before." "I've navigated complex situations before," Cassian said. "Yes." A silence in which Holt appeared to be performing a moral calculation he'd already done many times before and already knew the answer to. "What do you want in return?" he said. "The network gone. Victor prosecuted. The 11 people on that list located and recovered." Cassian leaned forward. "And distance, when this is over. My organization stays out of your jurisdiction, and you stay out of mine." "That's not something I have the authority to." "You have contacts who do." Another silence. "I'll need more than the list," Holt said finally. "I need the parallel manifest system, the actual documentation from inside Meridian Freight." Cassian nodded. "We're working on access." "How close are you?" "Close." Holt picked up the printed list. He folded it with the specific care of someone who understood what they were holding. He put it inside his jacket. He stood. "You have 72 hours before I have to report this conversation up my chain," he said. "After that, I can't control what happens." He looked at Selene one more time, briefly. "Stay alive." He left. The room held silence for a moment. Then Dorian said from the corner, "He's going to move faster than 72 hours. "I know," Cassian said. "Then we need to move faster than him." Cassian was already standing. He was looking at the door Holt had just walked through, and his jaw was set in the particular way she had come to recognize. Not anger, not calculation, something between them that lived in the space where decisions got made. "Get me access to the Meridian Freight system," he said. "Whatever it takes." Dorian picked up his phone. Selene watched him do it. She watched the precise, unhurried movement of his hands on the phone, the way he stepped slightly away from the table to make the call, half-turned, giving himself the minor privacy of not being directly observed. She thought about what Cassian had said in the corridor. the logic to what he does, the consistency of decisions under pressure. She thought about contamination, how it moved. She thought about the specific phrasing Dorian had used with Agent Holt. The laptop was in plain sight, and how that phrasing had been delivered with the ease of something rehearsed, not improvised. The ease of someone who had prepared for this meeting more specifically than a general familiarity with legal strategy would explain. She didn't say anything. She watched Dorian's back while he made his call, and she filed it. Victor Sarzin made contact on the 9th day. Not directly. Through a chain of cutouts that eventually produced an unsigned message delivered through a restaurant owner 2 streets from the casino who owed Cassian a debt. The message was 3 sentences. She is not yours to keep. Return what was taken and this ends here. You have until the gala. Cassian read it once. He set it on the desk. He looked at Selene. There's a gala, he said. I gathered. Vale Tower. It's a charity event, high attendance, political contacts, press. He paused. Victor attends every year without fail. He uses it to maintain his legitimate face. You're thinking about going. I'm thinking about bringing you. The room was quiet. That's insane, she said. It's the opposite. Victor expects me to hide you. He expects this to be a siege, my walls versus his resources. If we appear at the gala publicly, before he has time to manufacture the approach he's planning, we force him to react instead of act. You want to use me as bait. I want to use the fact that you're not hiding as a statement. There's a difference. Is there? Yes. He met her eyes. You would be standing beside me, with 50 witnesses and a press corps. Victor's legitimate face requires that he maintain certain boundaries. He won't move against you in that room. And after the room? After the room is what we're preparing for. She stood with the cold logic of it. She stood with the fact that she hated it, and it made sense, and both of those things were simultaneously true. Who else knows about this plan? She said. You, me, and Dorian. She looked at the desk. When is the gala? 4 days. She looked back at him. 4 days, she said, to find the manifest system, give Holt something actionable, and figure out who in your organization has been feeding Victor information. Yes? That's an aggressive timeline. Yes. She exhaled slowly. All right. All right, he said. Not surprised, not relieved, just that quality of being already decided, already moving. She left the room and went back to the corridor, and she stood there alone for a moment with her hand flat on the cold wall, and she thought, 4 days. She thought about the silver light of a charity gala, about standing in a room full of people who had Victor Sarzen's phone number and called it socially, about what it would mean to walk into that room not as a name on a transfer list, but as something else entirely, about the specific cost of becoming something else entirely. She went to find Dorian. She needed him to show her everything he knew about Meridian Freight, every access point, every vulnerability in their system. She found him in the operations room, alone this time, the other men gone. He was standing at the board, but he wasn't adding anything to it. He was just looking at it. Still in a way that was different from his usual stillness, heavier, like something had settled on him while she wasn't watching. He heard her come in and turned. Selene, he said. His expression reset to its normal configuration, smooth, precise. Walk me through Meridian Freight, she said. I want to understand the system architecture. Now? Now? He studied her for a moment, those flat, watchful eyes. Sure, he said. Pull up a chair. She pulled up a chair. She sat across from him and watched his hands on the keyboard and listened to him explain the infrastructure of Victor Sarzen's shadow operation with the fluency of someone who had studied it long and hard. With the fluency, she thought, of someone who knew it from the inside. She kept her breathing even. She kept her face neutral. She listened and she memorized and she thought, I know what contamination looks like. I lived inside it for 2 years. Outside the window, Black Hollow City moved through another night, indifferent and relentless. And 4 days away the gala waited, glittering and dangerous, like a trap. The 4 days passed like a fuse burning. Selene barely slept through any of them. She moved through the operations rhythm instead. The operations room in the mornings, Dorian's briefings in the afternoons, the corridor at night when the suite felt too much like a room she was trapped in rather than one she'd chosen. She ate when reminded. She drank coffee that was better than anything she'd had in 2 years, which she refused to find meaningful. She learned the Meridian freight system the way she'd learned everything hard, by asking the same questions from different angles until the structure revealed itself. Dorian was patient with her in the way that functioned as its own kind of warning. Too patient, too fluent, too ready with answers that should have required more retrieval time. She said nothing. She filed everything. On the third day, she found what she'd been looking for. It was in the system architecture Dorian had laid out. A secondary access node in the manifest documentation that didn't connect to any of the legitimate Meridian terminals. It sat at the edge of the shadow infrastructure like a door that had been built and then deliberately obscured with furniture. She didn't flag it to Dorian. She photographed the screen with a phone Cassian had given her, and she went to Cassian alone. He looked at the photograph for a long time. "Where is this?" he said. "Buried in the manifest system. It's an access point that doesn't correspond to any of the legitimate nodes Dorian mapped for me." She watched his face. "Someone built it separately and integrated it after the fact. It's not Victor's standard architecture." Cassian set the phone down on the desk. "It's an extraction point," he said quietly, "for pulling the shadow manifests out without going through the main system. Which means whoever built it has been taking copies. Or feeding copies outward." The room was still. "Cassian," she said. "I know," he said. "It matches what you already suspected." "Yes." "Then you need to tell me who—" "Not yet." He picked the phone back up. He looked at the image again, and there was something happening behind his eyes that she couldn't fully read. Not denial, past denial, something more like a man standing in a room he's been in before and recognizing the specific quality of the disaster waiting on the other side of the next door. "Not yet, Selene." She left it there. She went back to the suite and sat with what she knew and what she almost knew, and the gap between them that still had Dorian's face in it. The gala was on a Thursday. They gave her a dress the afternoon before. Someone had judged her measurements without asking and gotten them right, which was its own quiet demonstration of what this organization was capable of when it chose to pay attention. The dress was silver, fitted through the torso, floor length. She stood in front of the mirror in the suite bathroom and looked at herself for a long time. The bruise under her eye had faded to yellow and then to nothing. The split lip was healed. The rib still caught when she moved wrong, but she had learned to breathe around it. She barely recognized the face in the mirror. Not because it was changed, because she was looking at it differently, with the eyes of someone who had stopped apologizing for taking up space and hadn't fully absorbed the fact of the change yet. The woman in the mirror looked like someone about to walk into a room full of dangerous people and refuse to be afraid of any of them. She decided that was accurate. Cassian knocked at 7. He was in a dark suit, charcoal like the coat from the first night, white shirt, no tie. The specific combination of formal and controlled that announced a man who dressed for function rather than approval. He stopped when he saw her. His expression did the small thing it sometimes did, a compression, a recalibration, and then it returned to neutral. "Ready," he said. Not a question. "Yes," she said. They rode to Vale Tower in a vehicle with 4 of his men in a second car behind. Cassian sat beside her this time, instead of across from her, close enough that she could feel the warmth of his arm without them touching. He looked out the window. She looked at her hands. "Victor will be there within the first hour," he said. "He always arrives early enough to establish territory." "How many of his people?" "Socially, 4 or 5, the rest outside." He paused. "Our people have the perimeter." "And Dorian?" "A beat. Dorian is already inside. He coordinated the security layout with the tower's event team." She said nothing. "Selene." "I heard you." He turned from the window and looked at her profile. "I need you to stay close to me tonight, whatever happens." She turned and met his eyes. This close, she could see the specific texture of his exhaustion, the kind that came not from lack of sleep, but from carrying something too heavy for too long without being able to set it down. She had that exhaustion herself. She recognized it the way you recognize a dialect from your home country spoken in a foreign city. "I'll stay close," she said. He nodded. He looked back out the window. His hand was on the seat between them, not touching hers 3 inches away, and she thought about reaching for it and decided that was a different night, a different version of this situation, one where the city outside wasn't full of men with her name in a ledger. The car stopped. Vale Tower rose above them, obsidian-faced, its lobby blazing with the amber warmth of an event already in motion. The ballroom was on the 42nd floor, and it was enormous and loud in the specific way expensive rooms become loud when filled with people who are performing their own importance. Chandeliers, a string quartet in the corner producing music that nobody was listening to, white tablecloths and candles, and the kind of floral arrangements that cost more than Selene had made in a month at her last real job. She walked in beside Cassian and felt the room shift, not dramatically, not all at once, but in the way a current shifts when something new enters the water. Small adjustments in posture around the room, heads turning without fully turning, conversations that paused and resumed at a slightly different pitch. Cassian Vale in a room was an event whether he intended it to be or not. Cassian Vale with a woman in silver at his side was a statement. She kept her shoulders back. She kept her chin level. She breathed through the instinct to fold inward. He introduced her to no one. He moved through the room with her at his side and people came to him. A city councilman with a handshake that lasted too long, 2 businessmen in expensive watches, a woman who worked for the mayor's office and looked at Selene with the professional blankness of someone trained to reveal nothing. Cassian was courteous and minimal in equal measure. He shook hands. He said the expected things. He kept Selene at his right side without appearing to monitor her. She monitored the room instead. Victor Sarzin arrived 40 minutes in. She knew him before Cassian could point him out, knew him the way you know a dog by the way other dogs react before you see it. A small shift near the entrance. A realignment. Victor was taller than she'd imagined, broad through the shoulder, with silver-streaked hair, and the face of a man who had decided early in his life that charm was more efficient than force, and had practiced it so long it had calcified into something that looked natural but was entirely constructed. He moved through greetings with the ease of a man who had been in rooms like this for 30 years. Then he saw her. From across the room. 50 feet of crowd and candlelight between them. He didn't stop moving. He didn't change expression. But his eyes found hers for exactly 2 seconds, and in those 2 seconds she understood with absolute clarity that this was not a man who had been surprised. This was a man who had known exactly what he would find when he walked through those doors. She kept her face neutral. She turned back to the conversation Cassian was navigating and said nothing. Cassian felt her shift. He leaned marginally toward her. "He's here," she said quietly. "I saw him. He knew I'd be here." Cassian, he wasn't surprised. A pause that she felt through his arm. "Stay close." Months. The next 30 minutes were the most controlled performance of her life. She held a glass of water and smiled at things and moved with Cassian through the density of the room and felt the whole time like walking through a field where the ground might give way at any step. Victor circulated on the far side of the room, never approaching, never not visible. He talked to the councilman. He talked to the mayor's liaison. He laughed at something a man in a gray suit said, and the laugh was warm and completely empty. Then something changed. She felt it before she identified it. A different quality of attention in the room, less ambient, more focused. The string quartet stopped between pieces, and in the silence that followed, a sound she couldn't immediately place. Something technical, electronic. The lights changed. Not the room lights. Something else. Screens. She hadn't noticed the screens before, recessed into the upper walls of the ballroom at intervals, the kind used for event presentations. They were activating now, one by one, and on them was not a charity slideshow. On them was documentation, photographs, financial records, port manifests, surveillance imagery with timestamps and location codes, names connected to accounts, connected to transaction histories that were instantly, unmistakably, the internal infrastructure of Cassian Vale's criminal empire laid bare under high-resolution lighting. The room erupted. Not immediately. There was a half-second in which everyone in the ballroom processed what they were looking at simultaneously, and in that half second it was perfectly silent, and then the noise came all at once. Voices overlapping, chairs moving, a woman somewhere to the left saying something in a high-pitched, frightened register, men in suits already reaching for phones, a federal agent she now recognized from 3 tables over. Holt, and the presence of Holt told her this had been coordinated with official timing, that this was not ambush, this was execution of a plan already in motion. Cassian went completely still beside her. The stillness of a man who has been hit and is deciding whether he can stand. She put her hand on his arm. He didn't look at her. He was looking at the screens. "This is Victor," she said. "Yes." He had this prepared. "Yes." "Cassian." She tightened her grip on his arm. He had this prepared, which means he knew about Holt, he knew about the list, he knew what we... A crack, not a champagne glass, not a door. A gunshot from the eastern end of the ballroom, followed by 2 more in fast sequence, and the room went from panicked noise to panicked motion. Bodies moving in every direction, screaming, the chandelier above them swaying on its mount from the percussion, glass breaking somewhere to the right. Cassian spun toward her and put his body between her and the eastern wall in a single movement that was entirely instinct, no thought, just mass and direction, and she felt his hand close on her arm, tight, not painful, the grip of someone holding something they intend to keep. His men materialized, 2 of them flanking, a third moving toward the eastern wall where the shots had come from, and that was when she understood the specific horror of what was happening. His men were moving against another set of his men. Black hollow suits on both sides of the ballroom, Cassian's organization's dress code on both teams. Someone had turned them. From within. She heard Cassian say something in a low, rapid voice to the man beside him, and the man went pale, actually pale, which was something she would not forget. And he said, "Dorian gave the East team a different signal. They thought the protocol had..." "Where is he?" Cassian said. "I don't..." "Where is Dorian?" A second volley of shots from across the room. The chandelier came down in a cascade of crystal and light that hit a table 30 feet away, and the noise of it was enormous and final. Smoke was beginning to fill the room from somewhere below. The casino level, she realized. Understanding coming in pieces, Victor had compromised the casino floor as well. Cassian was bleeding. She saw it when the emergency lighting kicked on, red-tinged, casting everything in the colors of exactly what this was. His left arm, dark stain spreading through the charcoal suit jacket above the elbow. He hadn't said anything. "You're shot," she said. "I know." His voice was the same. Clipped and controlled, and she hated him for it, for how controlled he kept it. "We need to move." "Cassian, we need to move now, Selene." They moved. Through the screaming crowd toward the service corridor at the ballroom's rear. His man in front, Cassian's hand still on her arm, the sound of automatic fire now coming from multiple directions and mixing with the fire alarms and the crash of something structural giving way in the casino below. She could feel the vibration of it through the floor. The building was breathing wrong. The service corridor was concrete and fluorescent and mercifully empty. His man took a position at the door they'd come through. Cassian leaned against the wall and pressed his right hand against the wound on his left arm and looked at it with the diagnostic expression of someone assessing a problem rather than experiencing pain. "How bad?" she said. "Through and through. Muscle. I've had worse." "That's not reassuring." It wasn't intended to be. He lifted his eyes from the wound to her face. "Are you hurt?" "No." "Look at me clearly. Are you hurt anywhere?" "No, Cassian, I'm not." The door at the far end of the corridor opened, and Dorian Ruse walked through it. He wasn't running. That was the first thing. He walked through the door with the specific, unhurried quality that she had watched for 11 days and finally understood for what it was. Not calm, not composure, but the absence of stakes. A man for whom the outcome of this night was already decided and had been decided for a long time. He had a gun at his side. Not raised, just held the way you carry something you expect to need. He looked at Cassian. Cassian looked at him. The space between them had 11 years in it, and the 11 years were collapsing in real time, and she could see it in Cassian's face. Not shock, past shock, something worse. The look of a man who has run the calculation 40 times and accepted the answer and is still not prepared for what it actually feels like standing in the hallway with it. How long? Cassian said. Dorian didn't answer immediately. His eyes moved to Selene, then back to Cassian. How long, Dorian? Does it matter? Yes. A pause. Something moved through Dorian's expression. Not guilt, not exactly. Something more complicated. The expression of a man who had made a choice so far back that the choice itself had become invisible, folded into who he was. 4 years, Dorian said. The fluorescent light buzzed above them. 4 years, Cassian said. His voice had no inflection at all. Victor approached me after the Caldwell situation. You remember the Caldwell situation? Dorian shifted his weight slightly. Not nervously, repositioning. You burned $3 million in product to make a point. That was the moment I understood that this organization runs on your ego and not on any sustainable... Don't, Cassian said. I'm explaining. You're justifying. That's different. I know the difference. Cassian's hand was still pressed against his arm. The stain had spread, but his posture hadn't changed. The private number. You gave it to Nolan. A beat. Yes, Dorian said. Selene felt the word hit her like cold water. She looked at Dorian, at the flat, watchful face she had sat across from for days, the hands she had watched on keyboards, the voice she had listened to explaining the infrastructure of Victor's operation, with the fluency of someone who knew it from the inside. She had thought she'd filed it. She had thought she'd been watching. And she had been. She had seen the edges of it, but she hadn't seen this, hadn't seen that the private number, the accident of her survival, the phone call that had started all of it, had not been an accident at all. Why? She said. Her voice came out different than she expected, level, stripped of everything but the question. Dorian looked at her. His expression was not unkind, which was the most obscene part. Victor needed someone connected to Vale operations. Nolan needed a way to clear a debt he couldn't clear legitimately. Your name was already in Victor's acquisition pool. He paused. The number was meant to go to voicemail, an emergency line that had been quietly disconnected 6 months prior. I fed Cassian a report that it was still active. If you called it, nothing would happen. Nolan would collect. Debt cleared. Clean. She stared at him. But you called it, Dorian said. And Cassian happened to be in the monitoring room that night running a sweep, and the line was still active because I had the report wrong by 2 weeks. Something crossed his face. Something she couldn't name. That part wasn't planned. So I was supposed to disappear, Selene said. Yes. The word was simple and terrible, and he delivered it without flinching. And the gala, Cassian said. You fed Victor the timeline. The moment Holt made contact, I passed the meeting details. Victor's had this prepared for 3 months. He was waiting for the right public moment. Dorian tilted his head slightly. It's a good plan, Cassian. Honestly, he'll have you federally implicated before the night is over, and the competing syndicates will move on your operations within 48 hours. You'll have nothing left to burn. You think I care about the operations? I think you care about... Dorian's eyes moved to Selene and back. Yes, I think you care about her, which is why Victor has people at every exit to this building except the one I just came through. He paused. I can walk you out through the dock-level access. Both of you. I negotiated that. Your people scatter, you disappear, Victor takes the organization, and this ends without anyone else dying tonight. Cassian looked at him for a very long time. The buzzing of the fluorescent light was the only sound. Somewhere above them, the fire alarm cycled and then went silent, which was somehow worse. And in exchange, Cassian said, you walk away, permanently. Black Hollow is Victor's, and you don't reconstruct anything, anywhere. Dorian's voice had the quality of a man reading from a document he'd memorized. It's a reasonable offer, Cassian. You're standing in a corridor bleeding. Your organization just split in half in a ballroom. Holt has your documentation on those screens, and federal agents are coming through the front of this building right now. Cassian looked at his hand against his arm. He looked at the blood. He looked at Selene, and she saw, in the particular quality of his gaze, in the one fractured second before he recalculated, She saw the exact shape of what it cost him. Not the empire, not the operations, the specific weight of standing here and looking at her and having put her in this corridor, in this building, in this city, in this situation, because he had pulled a thread 14 days ago that had been connected to a wire, connected to a charge that someone he trusted had been building for 4 years. She saw it, and she looked away because she didn't trust herself to hold it. "Selene," Dorian said. She looked back at him. "I'm giving him a way out because of you," Dorian said. "Victor wanted Cassian dead. I negotiated for live exile. You should know that." He said it without apparent expectation of gratitude. Just information, transferred. She thought about what she knew about contamination, about how it moved, about how you lived inside it for years telling yourself the walls were stable and the floor was solid, and the person across the table had the same stakes as you. "You told me not yet when I asked who you suspected," she said. "In the operations room, day 4. "Yes. You were the one I should have suspected." "Yes. And you told me that to keep me looking outward." A pause. Something in his expression shifted, fractionally, just enough. "You're perceptive." "I was perceptive too late." "You were perceptive exactly on time," Dorian said, and the way he said it was almost gentle. "You found the access node. You went to Cassian alone. If you'd come to me first, I know what would have happened if I'd come to you first." The corridor was silent except for the distant chaos above and below them, the sounds of a night that had already been decided, playing out its final movements. Cassian straightened from the wall. He took his hand from the wound. He looked at Dorian with the eyes of a man who had closed a door permanently and wasn't going to open it again to look at what was on the other side. "The dock-level access," he said. "How long before Victor's people expect to see us come through or not come through?" Dorian checked his watch. 8 minutes. "Then you'll take us through in the next 5. "Cassian, I'm not done." Cassian's voice had dropped to the register she recognized from the very first night. The one that had no performance in it, nothing constructed, just the raw load-bearing structure of who he actually was. "You'll take us through, and then you'll tell Victor that Selene and I are gone and that the terms are met. You'll tell him he has the organization and the operations and the city, and there is no reconstruction and no retaliation coming." Dorian studied him. And then I'll spend whatever time it takes making sure Victor Sarzan has no network left to run and no city left to run it in." Cassian held his gaze. "You told him I'd walk away. I'm going to. And then I'm going to take everything he built and put it on the floor. That's not walking away. That's walking away from Black Hollow." He paused. "The rest is a different thing." Dorian was quiet. 7 minutes, Cassian said. Dorian turned and opened the door he'd come through. He held it. Selene looked at Cassian. He was pale under the overhead light, and the wound on his arm had soaked through his jacket sleeve, and he was standing with the posture of a man who had lost everything that night and had already sorted through the rubble for what was salvageable and found exactly one thing. She walked through the door. He followed. The corridor below was industrial. Concrete and pipe, and the smell of machine oil and harbor water seeping through the walls. Dorian moved ahead of them with the knowledge of a man who had mapped this route a long time before tonight. Selene walked beside Cassian, and she felt his arm brush hers in the narrow corridor, and she didn't move away. "I'm sorry," he said. Very quiet. Not for her, not performed, the kind of apology you say when there's no audience and no expectation. "Don't," she said. "Selene, not yet," she said. "Get us out of the building first." He was quiet. They walked. Ahead of them, Dorian pushed open a heavy metal door, and cold salt air hit them. Harbor wind, diesel, the specific smell of the waterfront at night. She could see the dock lights through the opening, the distant red and white of emergency vehicles several blocks away, the black water beyond the pier. She stepped through the door. She stopped. Because standing at the dock entrance, with 6 men behind him in the dark, was Victor Sarzan. He was still in his gala clothes. He looked at Dorian. He looked at Cassian. He looked at Selene with the specific satisfaction of a man whose plan has executed within acceptable parameters. "Dorian," Victor said, You were supposed to bring me one. Dorian turned, and Selene understood in the compressed clarity of that moment, the cold air, the dock lights, the 6 guns now finding their angles, that the negotiation Dorian had offered in the corridor had never been a negotiation at all. It had been the last corridor of the trap. She looked at Cassian. His face told her he had understood it half a second before she did. Victor said something to the man on his left. The man moved towards Selene with the economical purpose of someone following an instruction they've been given in advance. Cassian stepped in front of her, and Selene, standing in the cold harbor wind with the water black behind her and the burning tower somewhere above, and Victor Sarzin 15 feet away with everything arranged exactly as he'd planned it, felt something move through her that she did not have a clean word for. Not anger, past anger, something older and more structural. The feeling of a floor finally giving way beneath a weight that had been building for... The man reached for her arm and Cassian broke it. Not figuratively. The snap was audible over the harbor wind, clean and final, and the man went down without a word, just a sound that wasn't language, and Cassian stepped across him toward the next one before Victor's formation had fully processed what had happened. The wound on his arm didn't slow him. He would think about that later. She would think about the specific quality of a man who operates through pain the way some people operate through weather, acknowledging it, moving anyway. Victor stepped back. One step. Controlled. His face didn't break, but something behind his eyes recalculated. "Hold," he said to his men. They held. 6 guns up, angles covered, the dock lights cutting hard shadows across concrete and black water. Cassian had stopped moving. He was standing over the man on the ground, with his right hand still in the configuration it had made the break with, and his left arm hanging at his side, the sleeve dark and heavy. Selene was behind him, 1 step behind. She could see the set of his shoulders, the specific brace of someone who has already done the math and accepted the number. "You should sit down," Victor said to Cassian, almost conversational. The voice of a man who had already won and was allowing himself the luxury of being pleasant about it. "You're going to bleed out standing up." "I've had worse," Cassian said. "You keep saying that. I've been told you say that." Victor straightened his jacket. Behind him, Dorian stood against the dock wall, very still, with the expression of a man who has delivered a package and is waiting for acknowledgement. Victor didn't look at him. It's a very determined thing to say. It's also not the relevant question. What's the relevant question? Whether the woman behind you is worth dying for. Victor's eyes moved to Selene, smooth and direct, and stayed there. "I've looked at your file, Miss Vey. Environmental science degree. 2 years with a man who turned out to be a data entry clerk for my organization. 1 phone call that shouldn't have connected." He tilted his head. "You are the most expensive accident I've encountered in a very long career." She looked back at him. She kept her face neutral the way she'd been keeping her face neutral for 11 days of learning and watching and filing, and she let him read her as nothing, as a woman standing on a dock in a ruined silver dress with nowhere to go, because that reading suited her right now. "This doesn't have to be complicated," Victor said, returning to Cassian. "You're already done. The screens upstairs did their job. Holt has your documentation and his hands aren't clean enough to throw it away. By morning, your operation is legally compromised and your competing colleagues in this city will do the physical work of dismantling the rest." He spread his hands. "Reasonable. Patient. What I need from you is to stop. Stop building. Stop reaching. Stop sending people into my infrastructure." He paused. "Give me that and the woman walks. She gets on a bus to wherever her mother lives and she never becomes relevant again." Cassian said nothing. "Cassian." Victor's voice hardened at the edges, just the edges. "I'm not a man who enjoys excess. I do not want to put her in the water tonight. I want to close a ledger that has been open too long." "She's not a ledger entry," Cassian said. "To me, she is." Victor's eyes moved back to Selene with the flat professional attention of an accountant reviewing a line item. "To you, she's apparently something else. That's your problem. It's the problem I'm offering to solve." The dock was cold. The fire at the tower had spread to the upper floors. She could see the orange reflection of it in the water, 30 stories of controlled chaos playing out somewhere above and behind them. The emergency sirens had multiplied. Somewhere in the city, things were moving that couldn't be stopped. Holt's people, the competing organizations that had been in that ballroom, the chain reactions of a night that Victor had engineered over months and lit in 1 hour. She understood with complete clarity that Victor was right about most of it. She understood with equal clarity that it didn't matter, because Dorian was still against the dock wall, still waiting. And Dorian had told her something in a concrete corridor that Victor did not know he had told her. She looked at Dorian. Dorian looked back at her. She said, "The access node." Dorian went still. Victor looked at her. "What?" "The secondary access node in the Meridian Manifest system." She kept her voice level. She was breathing carefully, not shallow, not fast, the steady, deliberate breathing of someone managing their own adrenaline through sheer force of decision. "The one that extracts shadow, manifest copies outside the main system. The one Dorian built to pull documentation without leaving Victor's standard trace." Victor turned to Dorian. Dorian's face had changed. The flatness was gone. Underneath it was something she had not seen there before. The expression of a man who has been operating on the assumption that he is the most prepared person in any given room and has just discovered he was wrong. "She's guessing," Dorian said. "I photographed it," Selene said. "On the phone Cassian gave me. Day 3. I went to Cassian alone and we looked at it together and I described exactly what it meant and where it sat in the architecture." She paused. Dorian built a second pipeline out of Victor's system. He's been pulling shadow manifest data for 4 years. Not for Victor, for himself. The dock was very quiet. Victor looked at Dorian, and she watched Victor Sarzen, a man who had spent 30 years building a criminal enterprise on the specific foundation of knowing what everyone around him was actually doing. She watched him arrive at the understanding she'd been waiting for him to arrive at. "Dorian," Victor said. His voice had lost the pleasantness. What was underneath was not anger. It was something colder. "The access node has nothing to do with tonight. 4 years of shadow manifests," Victor said. "Pulled out of my system. To where?" "Victor, this is not—" "To where, Dorian?" The 6 guns on Cassian had not moved, but the quality of the men holding them had shifted. The slight physical adjustment of people receiving new information about the geography of their loyalty. And Dorian ran. What? He went left, towards the dock's far end, and he was fast. Faster than she would have credited him. The speed of a man who has always had an exit plan and has been physiologically ready to use it. 2 of Victor's men broke after him on instinct, and Victor said something sharp in a language she didn't catch, and one of them stopped. The other didn't. Cassian moved at the same moment, not after Dorian, but toward Victor. And he moved like a man who has accepted that getting shot is a possible outcome and has decided it isn't the prohibitive outcome, closing the distance before the remaining 4 guns could coordinate, driving his right elbow into the nearest man's throat and taking the gun from him in the same movement with the mechanical efficiency of someone who trained for this the way other people trained for sport. The dock erupted. Selene dropped, not out of fear, out of calculation, the body processing threat vectors and selecting the response with the lowest profile. She went to the concrete and she felt it tear her knees through the silver dress, and she looked for cover and found a steel mooring bollard 8 feet to her left, and she moved to it on hands and knees while gunfire cracked above her. She pressed against the bollard and breathed. She could hear Cassian, not his voice, his presence in the fight, the specific sounds of controlled violence, impacts, something heavy hitting the dock, the clatter of a weapon skidding on concrete. She did not look. She counted the shots she'd heard. 3 from Victor's side, none that had registered as hitting Cassian, though she was aware that absence of sound was not the same as absence of damage. Victor was shouting something. She looked around the bollard. Cassian had 2 of them down and was fighting the 3rd with the wound on his arm, doing what wounds do when you ignore them. Opening, spreading, the sleeve now entirely soaked in dark. He was slower on the left side. Compensating. The 3rd man knew it and was working that angle deliberately. Victor was backing toward the dock's edge warehouse. He was on a phone, calling more people in. She had 30 seconds. Maybe less. She looked at the gun that had skidded on the concrete during the first exchange. It had come to rest against the dock wall 6 feet from her position between her and the fight. She looked at it with the specific attention of someone who has never been in this situation and is discovering whether they are the kind of person who acts or the kind who waits to be acted upon. She moved. She crossed the 6 feet in a low run, and she picked up the gun, and it was heavier than she expected, and her hands were shaking, but not badly, the same not badly as the bathroom floor 2 weeks ago. The particular tremble of a body with adequate adrenaline and a mind that has decided. Victor had his phone to his ear. He was 20 feet away. She stood up. She pointed the gun at him. He saw her. He stopped talking. "Put it down," she said. He looked at her for a moment, at the gun, at her hands, at her face. "Miss Vey," he said. He lowered the phone slowly. He did not lower it to hang up. He held it at his side. "You're holding a gun you don't know how to use." "I'm holding a gun," she said. "Whether I know how to use it is information you don't have." He studied her. "End the call," she said. "There are people coming regardless. End the call and put the phone on the ground and step away from the warehouse door." He held her gaze. She held his. She was not calm. She wanted to be clear about that with herself. There was nothing calm happening inside her body. Her heart was hitting the inside of her sternum hard enough to feel in her throat, and the gun was not entirely steady, and she was standing on a dock in Black Hollow Harbor in what was left of a silver dress, with a man who ran a trafficking network 15 feet away and a burning tower behind her. But she was not afraid of him. She had been afraid of Nolan Pike for 2 years, and Nolan Pike was a middleman and a coward. And this man who moved through charity galas and black market logistics with equal ease, this man was not more frightening than what she'd already survived. He was just bigger. He was just better resourced. She kept the gun level. Victor ended the call. He bent and set the phone on the concrete. He stepped 1 step left of the warehouse door. Behind her, she heard the fight end, a specific quality of silence that follows the last impact, the exhale of a space that has stopped producing violence. She didn't turn around. "Selene," Cassian's voice, strained but present. "I have him," she said. A pause. "I see that. Are you standing?" "Yes." "Are you still bleeding?" "Yes." "Then stay where you are." She kept her eyes on Victor. Victor looked back at her with an expression she hadn't seen on him before. Not fear, he wasn't afraid of her, but something adjacent to respect, the expression of a man reassessing a variable. "You're not going to shoot me," he said. "You're not that person." "I'm standing on a dock holding a gun," she said. "You should probably update your information about what kind of person I am. You called an emergency line 2 weeks ago because you were too afraid to—" "I called an emergency line because my hands were shaking. My hands are shaking now. That's not the same as being afraid of you." She took 1 step forward. "The difference between 2 weeks ago and right now is that 2 weeks ago I was afraid of someone I thought loved me. I have no confusion about you. You're just a man who decided other people's lives were a resource." Something moved through Victor's face. "Dorian," she said, without looking away from Victor. "Did you get him?" Silence from the far end of the dock. Then the sound of footsteps. 2 sets. Returning. The man Victor had sent after Dorian came back through the dock lights with his gun up and Dorian walking in front of him. Dorian's lip was split and he was favoring one side, but he was walking and his face had settled back into something controlled, or trying to. He looked at Selene holding the gun on Victor and he stopped. "The access node," Victor said to Dorian. Not loudly. The voice of a man who has other things to deal with right now, but has filed this topic and intends to return to it. "We're going to have a very specific conversation. Victor, not now." Victor looked back at Selene. "Here is the position. You have 1 gun. I have, in the next 4 minutes, 6 more people coming through that warehouse. You have a man behind you who is losing blood at a rate that will become critical before those 6 people arrive." He spread his hands. "The math has not improved." "Agent Holt," Cassian said from behind her. Victor looked past her. "The call I made 20 minutes ago from the ballroom corridor," Cassian said. His voice was measured, but she could hear what was underneath it now. The specific fraying of a man operating past his threshold. "Before the gunfire started, I had 20 seconds in a stairwell, and I used them. Victor's expression shifted. He's not on your payroll, Cassian said. You bought the port liaison and the council members. You didn't buy Holt. I know because I checked when Selene told me about the access node. Holt's been building against you for 3 years, and I gave him the manifest access and the parallel system documentation and the location of this dock. That documentation was destroyed in the ballroom. The screens were Victor's show. The documentation was already transmitted. The copies Dorian pulled through his access node for 4 years, the ones he was planning to use as his own leverage against both of us. I had Selene photograph the node architecture, and I rebuilt the transmission pathway, and I sent Holt everything Dorian had. Cassian paused, breathed. The breathing had a sound to it now. 4 years of Victor Sarzin's shadow manifests, accessed through a back channel that leads directly to Dorian Ruse, sitting in a federal evidence server right now. The dock was silent except for the water. Victor looked at Dorian. Dorian looked at the ground. You built a kill switch, Victor said to him. Quiet, almost wondering. Inside my own system, and you were going to sell it. I was going to use it to stay alive, Dorian said, whichever direction this went. It went this direction, Victor said, and he looked at Dorian with the specific impersonal expression of a man writing something off. In the distance, and she had been listening for it, had been counting backward from Cassian's estimate, sirens. Not the tower sirens, moving sirens, coming from the direction of the city, from the road that ran along the waterfront, the specific pitch of vehicles traveling fast toward a known location. Victor heard them. His posture changed in a way that was almost imperceptible, and would have been invisible if she hadn't spent 11 days learning how men's bodies announce what their faces won't. He was calculating exits. She tightened her grip on the gun. Don't, she said. He looked at her. They're 3 minutes out, she said. You have 4 people on this dock, 2 of them on the ground. Dorian is compromised. Cassian already called it in, and I'm standing between you and the warehouse with a gun and nothing left to lose tonight. She held his gaze. Whatever you're calculating, subtract for the fact that I have already decided what I'm going to do if you move toward that door. Victor Sarzan looked at Selene Vey for a long moment. She looked back at him. The fire above them had been joined by helicopter spotlights beginning to sweep the harbor. Then, from the far end of the dock, a sound. A heavy door, the warehouse's secondary exit, slamming open. She registered it half a second before Victor moved. He went right, not toward the warehouse, toward the dock's edge. And he was fast, faster than his age and his suit suggested he should be. And she tracked him with the gun, but she didn't fire because there were 2 of his men still standing, and if she fired, they would fire, and Cassian was behind her bleeding. Victor hit the dock's edge and went over it. Not falling. Controlled. A boat. She heard the engine catch, already running, already positioned, because Victor Sarzan had not come to this dock without exits, and this had been the exit he'd built when all the others were closed. The 2 remaining men broke in opposite directions. Cassian took one down. The other ran. She let him run. She turned. Cassian was on one knee on the concrete. He had put himself there deliberately, not falling, kneeling, the controlled descent of someone managing a body that is registering its damage bill. His right hand was pressed against his left arm, and the concrete around his knee was dark. She crossed to him. She went down on her knees in front of him, and she put both hands over his on the wound, and she pressed, and he made a sound that was not quite pain and not quite relief. The boat, he said. He's gone. Holt needs to know. Cassian. She pressed harder. He exhaled through his teeth. Holt is 2 minutes away, and you are not allowed to bleed out on this dock. He looked at her face. This close, the dock lights catching his eyes, she could see the specific quality of his exhaustion, the complete and total expenditure of a man who has given everything available and is now running on something that isn't quite a resource. The manifests, he said. Holt has everything. I know. Victor is going to run. I know, Cassian. He won't run far. Holt has the network documentation. Victor has nowhere that... He stopped, breathed. He has nowhere left. I know, she said. Stop talking. I need to... You need to stay conscious, she said. That's all you need to do right now. Everything else can wait. He looked at her. She held his gaze, and she held the wound, and she felt his hands under hers. Large and cold now, the cold of blood loss, the cold of a body beginning to triage. And she kept her grip steady because it was the one thing in the entire wreckage of this night that she could do with complete competence. "Selene, I'm here. I'm sorry about the dress." She looked at him. It was so profoundly not what she'd expected him to say that she felt something break open in her chest. Not pain, the opposite of pain. The specific release of a pressure that had been building for longer than 2 weeks, longer than this dock, longer maybe than she could clearly identify. She almost laughed. She didn't. She kept her hands on the wound and her eyes on his face. "The dress was Victor's event anyway," she said. "I didn't choose it." "Still, Cassian..." "What?" "Be quiet." He was quiet. The sirens filled the harbor. Helicopter lights swept across the water and caught the dock and turned everything white for a moment. 2 people on concrete, hands locked together over a wound, the burning city reflected in the black water behind them. Dorian was still on the dock. She'd forgotten him for 30 seconds, and she turned and he was sitting against the dock wall, with his wrists in front of him, and the expression of a man who has completed his last available action and is now simply present in the outcome. He looked at her. She looked at him. "The access node documentation," he said. "Did he actually transmit it, or was that..." "I don't know," she said. It was the truth. Dorian absorbed this. He looked at the water. The first vehicle hit the waterfront road, then a second. Then the specific brightness of a federal response lighting up the dock approach, and she heard the amplified voice from somewhere beyond the warehouse calling out instructions in the flat, effectless tone of authority that has already decided what it is and what it wants and will not be negotiating either. She pressed her hands harder against Cassian's arm. He was still conscious. His eyes were open and on her face, and she held his gaze the same way she'd held Victor's earlier. Not out of fear, not out of performance. Out of the simple animal refusal to look away from the thing that the federal vehicles came in hard and loud and without apology. 4 of them, black with lights running, taking up the dock approach in a formation that left no geometry for exit. Doors opened before the vehicles fully stopped, and agents came out in the specific low-profile movement of people who have been briefed on an active scene and are treating every variable as hostile until demonstrated otherwise. The amplified voice from the lead vehicle was still issuing instructions into the cold harbor air. Hands visible. Do not move. Identify yourself. And the instructions had the quality of something spoken for the record rather than for the people on the dock, because the people on the dock were not moving and the agents could see that clearly. Holt came through the formation on foot. He looked older than he had in the conference room. The gala clothes were gone, field jacket, badge visible, the specific tiredness of a man who has been running an operation in real time for the last 2 hours, without the luxury of receiving clean information. He scanned the dock. He saw Dorian against the wall. He saw the men on the ground. He saw Cassian on one knee with Selene's hands on his arm. He crossed to them. He went down on one knee across from her and looked at the wound with the assessing eyes of someone who has seen field injuries before. He looked up at Cassian's face. "Vale." "Holt. The boat that left this dock 4 minutes ago." "Victor Sarzan," Cassian said. His voice was slower than it had been. Not slurred, deliberate, each word placed with care. "Harbor exit, southeast." He had it staged. Holt looked at one of the agents behind him, and something passed between them without language. The agent moved away with a radio. "The manifest," Holt said. "I received a transmission 40 minutes ago that I need you to confirm." "Everything Dorian pulled through his access node over 4 years," Cassian said. "Shadow manifests, transaction records, port liaison communications, the complete parallel infrastructure of Meridian Freight. It came through a pathway I rebuilt from the node architecture Selene photographed on day 3. Holt looked at Selene. She was still holding the wound. Her hands had gone stiff from pressure and cold, and she didn't release them. "It's real," she said. "I can walk you through the architecture." Holt held her gaze for a moment. "You're the woman from the list." "I'm the woman who was on the list," she said. "There's a difference." Something moved through Holt's face. He stood. He looked at Dorian against the wall. "Ruse," he said. not a question. Dorian looked up. His expression had completed its journey to something she didn't have a word for. Not defeat, not resignation, something more final than either. The expression of a man who built 4 years of contingency and watched it used against him. "I want a lawyer before I say anything," Dorian said. "That's your right," Holt said. He nodded to 2 agents. "Get him up." They got him up. Selene watched Dorian walk across the dock with his hands behind him, and she felt nothing she could immediately name. Not satisfaction, not the particular cold relief she'd expected from seeing the architecture of his betrayal reach its consequence. Something more complicated, something that had to do with the specific quality of watching a person you ate meals with and asked questions of and almost trusted walk away in custody, and understanding that the almost had been doing a great deal of work the entire time. A medic arrived beside her. Young, efficient, carrying a kit. He assessed Cassian's arm with quick hands and said something technical to another medic behind him. "You can let go now," the first medic said to Selene. She looked at her hands. They had been on the wound so long that releasing the pressure felt like a structural decision. She let go. Her hands were stiff and dark with blood, and she looked at them for a moment in the dock lights, and then she pressed them flat against her thighs, and she stood up, and she stepped back and let the medics do what medics do. Cassian looked at her while they worked on him. She looked back. Neither of them said anything. Whoosh. Victor Sarzan was picked up off the coast of Marin Point at 4 a.m. The Coast Guard found the boat running without lights, engine idling, the man at the helm sitting with his phone in his hand and no signal to use it with. He did not resist. He was brought in under federal maritime jurisdiction and processed in a facility 40 miles from Black Hollow City, and the processing was quiet and thorough and took most of the night, and when Holt's team went through what the transmission had contained, they found 11 years of documentation that no amount of lawyers was going to make clean. Selene learned this in a hospital waiting room at 5:30 in the morning. She was still in the silver dress. She had accepted a federal-issue emergency blanket somewhere around 3 a.m., and it was draped around her shoulders, silver foil over silver fabric, and she was sitting in a plastic chair with her hands wrapped around a paper cup of coffee that had gone cold an hour ago, and she was watching the door at the end of the corridor, without expecting anything specific from it. Holt sat down across from her. He had the look of a man who had been awake for 30 hours and had made peace with the fact of it. He set a folder on the chair beside him and laced his hands and looked at her with the expression she was beginning to associate with people who had questions they were trying to sequence correctly. "The 11 names on Victor's transfer list," she said before he could start. "3 are accounted for," he said. "We had teams move on 3 locations based on the manifest data tonight. They're safe, in processing. The other 8. The manifest data is giving us locations for 4 more. My people are moving now." He paused. "The remaining 4 are older entries. The documentation on them is—" He stopped, chose the word. "Incomplete." She absorbed this. Incomplete was a specific word. It meant what it meant. "Keep moving on the 4 you have locations for," she said. "We are." She looked at the cold coffee. "What do you need from me?" "A full statement. The access node documentation in your own words. The timeline from the moment you made the phone call, your observations of the internal operation." He paused. "It'll take several sessions." "Okay." "Miss Vey, what you did on that dock." "I pointed a gun at a man," she said. "I don't need it characterized." Holt was quiet for a moment. "You kept Victor Sarzan stationary for 4 minutes on an open dock. That's 4 minutes of position data for the Coast Guard intercept. Without those 4 minutes—" He stopped. "You should know it mattered." She looked at the door at the end of the corridor. "How is he?" she said. "Surgery finished an hour ago. The wound was through the muscle, no arterial damage. He lost significant blood." Holt paused. "He's going to be fine." She nodded. She didn't ask the next question, the one that was sitting underneath that answer, the one about what fine looked like on the other side of a night that had put Cassian Vale's entire organization under federal exposure. Holt wasn't going to answer that question in a hospital waiting room, and she wasn't ready to hear it yet anyway. "Get some rest," Holt said. He stood. "We'll start the statements tomorrow." He walked away with the folder under his arm and the exhaustion of a man who had been waiting 3 years to close a case, and was now facing the specific complicated reality of what closing it actually required. She sat in the plastic chair. She finished the cold coffee. She waited. They let her see him in the early morning, when the light outside the hospital window had gone from black to the specific flat gray that precedes color. He was awake. She had expected him to be, had formed in the waiting room an accurate picture of a man who would decline sedation past the minimum necessary and would be sitting upright by the time anyone came through the door. He was in a hospital bed with the upper portion elevated and his arm bandaged from elbow to shoulder, an IV line in the back of his right hand, and he looked, she searched for the word, reduced. Not diminished. Reduced the way a fire looks when you come back to it in the morning, and what's left is the actual structure, the bones of it, everything extraneous burned away. He looked like himself in a way he hadn't fully looked like himself in the 11 days she'd known him. She sat in the chair beside the bed. Neither of them spoke for a moment. "Victor," he said. "Marin Point, 4 a.m., Coast Guard." He closed his eyes briefly, opened them. The list. 3 confirmed safe, 4 more locations active. Holt's people are moving. She held his gaze. He said the documentation was sufficient. Something moved through Cassian's face, a release. Small and almost invisible, the specific exhale of a man setting down the thing he has been carrying longest. "Dorian," he said. "Federal custody." He asked for a lawyer. Cassian looked at the window. The gray light was still gray, just slightly less dark at its edges. 4 years, he said. She didn't respond. She had learned over 11 days the difference between the things he said that were looking for a response and the things he said that were looking for witness. This was the second kind. "I went over it," he said. "Every decision I made in 4 years. Looking for the moment where I should have seen it." He paused. "I can find the moments. In retrospect, they're clear. At the time, they were nothing. They were Dorian being Dorian." "That's how it works," she said. He looked at her. "Being inside it," she said. "The thing looks like the environment. It's not a failure of perception. It's what contamination does." She paused. "I spent 2 years not seeing Nolan for what he was. I wasn't stupid. I was inside it." He held her gaze. "That's not the same." "It's not the same situation," she said, "but it's the same mechanism." He was quiet. "You're not responsible for what Dorian chose," she said. "You're responsible for what you do next." "I know what I'm doing next." "I know you do," she said. "Holt told me about the immunity negotiations." His expression shifted. That was premature. For him to... He was being informative. She leaned forward slightly. "You're going to burn the organization." "I'm going to dismantle it. Selectively." He looked at his bandaged arm. There are people inside the Veil operation who were never given a choice about being inside it. Workers, managers, people who took a job and found out what the job actually was too late to leave without consequences. The dismantling has to protect them. Holt can do that. Holt wants convictions. I want people to not lose their livelihoods because Dorian and I built something corrupt around them. He paused. Those aren't the same objective, and I need to negotiate the gap. She looked at him. At the bandaged arm and the IV line and the flat gray light from the window touching the side of his face, and she thought, this is what he looks like when he's not performing anything. When the empire and the reputation and the careful architecture of projected control have all come down in one night, and what's left is just a man in a hospital bed who is already thinking about other people. She thought about the 9-year-old boy in a hospital waiting room, the same waiting room in every city, in every version of the same story. A child sitting with his hands in his lap, learning in real time that the world did not reliably send help. She thought about him hearing her voice on a line that should have been disconnected. "Cassian," she said. He looked at her. "Thank you," she said. Not the way she'd said it in the corridor of the marble suite that first night. Tentative, reflexive, a woman defaulting to gratitude because she'd been trained to. This was different, deliberate. Not for the rescue, for treating me like I had standing. He looked at her for a long moment. You had standing. A lot of men in your position wouldn't have seen it that way. A lot of men in my position are wrong about a lot of things. He paused. You found the access node. You held Victor on that dock. You called out Dorian in the corridor when I... He stopped. Something moved through his jaw. I couldn't have said it, not in that moment. To his face. I know. How did you know I couldn't? Because 11 years is 11 years, she said. And betrayal from someone you trusted that long. You can know it and still not be able to speak it out loud to them. You need someone outside the 11 years to say it. He looked at the window. The gray was becoming something else at its edges. Slow and incremental, the way real morning always arrives. Not as an event, but as a gradual accumulation of light that you only notice has changed when you look directly at it. Where will you go? He said. Not possessive, not angling. The honest question of a man who has accepted that this is her choice and is asking because he wants to know, not because he intends to influence the answer. She thought about it genuinely. There's a month of federal statements, she said. After that, she paused. I don't know yet. I had a life before Nolan that I mostly let go. Some of it is still there. She looked at the window. I might go find out what's recoverable. He nodded. And you, she said. Immunity negotiations, dismantlement, oversight. He said it without bitterness. Possibly a year of having Holt's people in everything I do. A pause. There are legitimate businesses in the structure, real ones, with actual workers and actual product. I'll keep those. You'll build something clean. I'll try. That's different from what you said you were. Yes, he said. It is. She looked at his face. He looked back at hers. The light was still coming. Nolan Pike entered protective custody 8 days later. She heard about it from Holt in their third statement session, delivered as a logistical update rather than a narrative event. Pike had agreed to testify against the remaining Sarzen network contacts in exchange for relocation and identity change. And the testimony was specific and detailed and would be useful, and the man himself was frightened in a way that was, Holt said, appropriate. Selene received this information and said, Okay. Holt looked at her. That's it? What else would there be? He made a note. Some people want more of a reaction. He's out of my life, she said. He was out of my life the night he hit a door that didn't hold. She folded her hands on the table. What I want is for the 8 names on that list to become 8 people in their own lives. That's what I want. By the end of the second week, 6 of the 8 had been located. She learned this from Holt at the end of their final statement session, 3 weeks after the dock. He laid it out quietly, without ceremony, because Holt was a man who understood that ceremony was a way of avoiding the weight of actual information. 6 recovered. 2, whose documentation trails ended in the manifest gaps he'd called incomplete. He said the investigation was ongoing. He said ongoing in the specific way that meant the investigation would continue past the point of being able to produce anything useful, and both of them knew it, and there was nothing clean to say about it, so neither of them said anything. She sat with the 2 names. She would sit with them for a long time. The waterfront apartment was on the 4th floor of a building that had been a warehouse 40 years ago and had been converted with the particular care of people who understood that industrial bones were worth keeping. Exposed brick, high ceilings, windows that were almost too large, flooding the space with harbor light at every hour of the day in different qualities. Brass in the morning, white at noon, amber at 4, the specific blue-gray of dusk that she came to love most. She moved in 6 weeks after the dock. She bought her own furniture for the first time in 3 years. She bought it slowly, one piece at a time, choosing each thing without negotiation. The chair she wanted, the table that fit the window, the lamp that threw the right quality of light for reading at night. Each purchase was so mundane it embarrassed her, and she let it embarrass her and bought the next thing anyway. She took a job with an environmental consultancy that worked with harbor and coastal remediation. She was overqualified for the entry position they offered her, and she took it without negotiating because she needed a beginning more than she needed a title, and beginning was what she had. She rebuilt contact with her friend Daria, who had not drifted as far as she'd believed, who had, in fact, been waiting at roughly the same address with roughly the same phone number, and who received Selene's call on a Wednesday afternoon with the specific warmth of someone who had never required an explanation, only a signal that the door was open again. She called her mother on a Sunday. That conversation was harder. Her mother cried in the way mothers cry when they've been holding something for too long. Not graceful, not contained. The ugly release of prolonged fear finally given permission to become sound. Selene sat on the floor of her apartment with her back against the brick wall and held the phone and let the crying happen and said, when it had run its course, "I'm okay. I'm actually okay." And her mother said, "I know, I can hear it." And that was true. It was audible in Selene's voice, the difference between someone saying "I'm okay" as a management tool and someone saying it because it's the accurate description of their current condition. She went back to the harbor sometimes in the evenings. She would stand at the railing of the waterfront walk and look at the water and think about the night it had all ended. The dock lights and the cold air and Cassian's hands under hers. The specific weight of holding a wound closed with nothing but pressure and refusal to let go. She thought about Victor on his boat with no signal and no exit. She thought about Dorian's face when she'd said access node and watched him understand that the thing he'd built to protect himself had been the instrument of his exposure. She thought about the 2 names on the list that remained open. She thought about them without resolution, because some things don't resolve, and the work of carrying them was learning to do so without letting the weight collapse you inward. She was learning. Cassian came to her on an evening in late autumn. She was in the apartment when she heard the knock. Not a building buzzer, a door knock, which meant he had come up through the building rather than announcing from the street. And she stood in the kitchen for a moment with a dish towel in her hands, and she thought about the specific set of choices that had produced this moment. The chain of them going back to a bathroom floor on Mercer Street and a phone she'd barely been able to hold. She opened the door. He was in a gray coat she hadn't seen before. No men behind him in the corridor, no vehicle visible through the window when she'd looked. He'd come on foot, or close to it. He looked different from every version of himself she'd encountered in the marble suite and the operations room and the hospital bed. He looked like a man who had made a significant number of difficult decisions in the preceding weeks and had arrived on the other side of them and was now standing in a corridor with his hands at his sides and nothing behind him except the walk he'd taken to get here. "You should have called," she said. "I didn't want to give you the option of telling me not to come," he said. Not aggressive, honest. The distinction was one she had learned to hear. She stepped back from the door. He came in. He looked at the apartment, the brick, the high windows, the amber harbor light coming through the glass, the chair she'd chosen, and the lamp in the corner. He looked at it the way you look at a space when you're reading what it says about the person who made it, not appraising, receiving. "Sit down," she said. He sat. In the chair she'd chosen, which felt appropriate for a reason she didn't try to articulate. She brought 2 cups of coffee and sat across from him on the edge of the low table. Not because there was nowhere else, but because sitting across from each other in upright chairs felt like a meeting, and sitting beside each other on a sofa felt like something she wasn't ready to name yet, and the table was a middle position, close and without the specific architecture of formality. He held the cup with both hands. She noticed, as she always had, the precision of his hands, the way they occupied space deliberately rather than incidentally. "The immunity agreement," he said. "It was finalized last week. Holt told me. The organization..." He paused, looked at the coffee. "The criminal infrastructure is gone. The physical assets are in federal receivership. The people who were inside it involuntarily have been cleared, and a significant number of them have been absorbed into the legitimate businesses that are being restructured under oversight." He looked up. "It took longer than I thought it would, and it cost more than I thought it would, and I would do it the same way again." "I know," she said. "Dorian entered a plea agreement 2 weeks ago," he said. "He'll be in federal custody for a minimum of 12 years. The plea included full cooperation on the Sarzen network documentation, which was the piece Holt needed to close the remaining warrants." He held her gaze. "He asked to send you a message." She looked at him. "Through his lawyer." He said, Cassian paused. Something moved through his jaw. "He said you were the sharpest person in the building, and he was sorry he underestimated you, and he was not sorry for anything else." She sat with that. "That sounds like him," she said. Yes. Did it cost you something to tell me that? Yes, he said, without elaboration. She looked at his face, at the specific quality of what had replaced the exhaustion she'd seen in the hospital. Not rest, not ease, something more earned than either. The quality of a man who has stopped carrying a version of himself that was built on the wrong foundation and is standing in the space where it used to be, deciding what to build instead. She thought about pattern analysis, about his definition of trust, delivered in a corridor at 11 p.m. A pattern analysis, not a feeling. She thought about all the patterns she had watched in the weeks since the dock, his patterns, her own, and what they accumulated to. Cassian, she said. He looked at her. Why did you come tonight? He set the cup down on the arm of the chair. He looked at it for a moment. Then he looked at her with the eyes she had first seen crouching in a broken bathroom doorway, dark and without performance, without the constructed architecture of what a man in his position was supposed to look like. Because I spent 11 days watching you take a situation that should have destroyed you and build tools out of it instead, he said. And then I spent 6 weeks thinking about what that meant. He paused, and I didn't want to wait any longer to find out if there was something here that was worth finding out. That's a careful way of saying something, she said. I'm a careful man. You're a careful man who drove an elbow through a man's throat on a dock at midnight. Tactically careful, he said. She almost smiled. She let herself almost smile. I'm not the person I was on Mercer Street, she said. I'm not the person I was in your marble suite, either. I've been... She stopped, looked at the window. The harbor light was the blue-gray of late dusk, her favorite quality of it, and it touched everything in the room with the specific generosity of light that doesn't demand anything. I've been building myself back from some kind of beginning, and I'm not finished, and I don't know what finished looks like yet. I know, he said. That's not a warning, she said. It's information. I understand the difference. She looked back at him. He looked back at her. I'm not asking you to be finished, he said. I'm not asking you to be anything specific. I'm asking... He stopped. The stopping was not uncertainty. It was the pause of a man choosing words with the care they deserved. I'm asking if you want company while you figure it out. The harbor light moved through the room. She thought about the woman on the bathroom floor. She thought about her hands on his wound on the dock, the physical certainty of that grip, the one thing she could do with complete competence while everything else was chaos. She thought about how competence had grown outward from that grip over the weeks since, accumulating, taking up space. She thought about the choice he was describing. Not rescue, not protection, not one person's life becoming the shelter for another person's surviving. Company, the word he'd used, the specific, unadorned word. She reached forward and picked up his hand from the arm of the chair. She held it. His hand closed around hers. Not tight, not possessive, with the care of something that understands its own weight. Neither of them said anything for a while. Outside, the harbor moved in its slow, perpetual way, indifferent to the city above it, indifferent to the specific human reckoning that had played out on its dock 6 weeks ago. Ships at anchor. The distant lights of the port running their standard rhythms. Water doing what water does, taking the shape of whatever contains it, and then, when the container is removed, finding its own level again. She looked at the window. He looked at the window. The two names, she said quietly, not to break the silence, inside it. He didn't ask which two. He knew. Holt's team is still moving, he said. I've provided 3 additional documentation sources from the restructured records. There's movement on one of them. He paused. I'm not going to tell you it's certain. I know. But I'm not going to stop. She pressed her thumb against the side of his hand. I know that too. The light outside had reached full dark. The harbor was a spread of distant illumination in dock lights, ship lights, the ambient glow of a city that had been through something and had, in its vast institutional indifference, continued anyway. Black Hollow City was not a city that paused. It absorbed and continued. It had absorbed the collapse of the Veil Syndicate and the federal prosecution of Victor Sarzen's network, and the specific ripple effects of one night in a ballroom and on a dock, and it had continued, and in its continuing it had made room, without noticing it had done so, for two people sitting in a fourth-floor apartment watching the harbor go dark. Selene Vey was 37 days past the worst night of her life. She was sitting in a chair she had chosen. She was holding the hand of a man she had not chosen, and had chosen anyway. The way you choose anything that costs you something and is worth the cost, not in a moment, but in accumulation, in the patient building up of one day against another until the weight of them tips towards something you can call a direction. The bruises were gone. The fear was not gone. She did not expect it to be gone. Fear, the real kind, the kind that comes from having learned exactly what people are capable of doing to each other, does not go away. It changes. It becomes information rather than weather. It becomes the thing you carry that teaches you what to watch for, rather than the thing that watches you. She had learned the difference. Cassian's hand was warm. She looked at the harbor one more time, and then she looked away from it, toward the lamp in the corner throwing its right quality of light, toward the apartment she had built one deliberate piece at a time, toward the specific ordinary miracle of a room that belonged to her, and she thought, this is what surviving looks like when you stop performing it. She was done performing it. Outside, dawn was still hours away, but the darkness had already begun, in the way of all darknesses, to carry within it the slow and patient structure of its own ending.